Ethan McAllister's gaze remained cold and distant, fixed on the polished surface of his glass as if it might hold the answers he'd long stopped looking for. His son, Liam, sat quietly beside him, his small hands gripping the edge of his wheelchair, eyes downcast, his silence only amplifying the distance between them. The faint hum of conversations around them, the clinking of silverware, and the soft rustling of menus filled the high-end restaurant, but none of it seemed to reach them. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Across the room, a figure moved among the diners, a waitress with a simple name tag that read Emily. Her steps were light but purposeful, her uniform neat, her eyes warm with a depth of understanding that not even the most polished executive could buy. Her gaze, however, wasn't fixed on the wealth around her or the elegant chandeliers overhead. No, Emily's focus had already zeroed in on the two at the table near the window. When a group of loud, mocking voices broke through the ambient noise, Ethan didn't hear them. But Liam did. And so did Emily. Liam's face tightened with discomfort as the cruel laughter directed at him escalated. He looked down at his hands, trying to shrink into himself, wishing for the world to swallow him whole. But Emily wasn't one to let that happen. Ethan didn't notice it at first, the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the sudden tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. His eyes flicked from his drink to his phone, checking a message about his latest business venture, dismissing everything around him with the practiced indifference of someone accustomed to controlling every detail of his life. But Liam's discomfort was palpable. Ethan, with all his wealth and ambition, had never been good at reading the subtle cues of his son's needs. Liam's disability wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. There were times when his son seemed as unreachable as the stars. Ethan had always told himself it was easier this way. He provided for Liam, gave him everything he could. What more did a child like him need? But when Liam's trembling hands gripped the arms of his chair, it was clear that whatever Ethan had been doing, it wasn't enough. The laughter grew louder. "Hey, is this the kid who thinks he's a genius just because he can memorize facts about cars?" One of the voices sneered. "Yeah, look at him. He doesn't even know how to smile," another mocked. Ethan froze. He hadn't heard them at first, but the malicious tones broke through the haze of his thoughts. His eyes flicked to Liam, but the boy was too embarrassed to lift his gaze. His shoulders hunched, trying to make himself smaller, as if disappearing was the only solution. A pang of guilt shot through Ethan. He should have said something. Should have defended his son. But all he could do was sit there, silent, too stunned to act. The weight of his own guilt settled like a stone in his chest. It was then that Emily entered the scene. She wasn't the kind of woman who allowed injustice to go unnoticed, especially when it came to a defenseless child. She moved toward the table with a steady pace, her gaze already narrowed on the group of young men who had been making cruel jokes. With a soft but commanding voice, she addressed them. "That's enough," she said, her words cutting through the laughter like a knife. The group fell silent, caught off guard by her intervention. They looked at her as though she were an inconvenience, a mere annoyance that might disrupt their fun. But Emily's gaze didn't falter. Her eyes were soft but firm, brimming with the kind of strength that came from having faced much worse than rude customers in a fancy restaurant. "Leave him alone," Emily continued, her tone even but filled with a quiet intensity. "You may think you're funny, but you're just showing how little you understand about real courage." Ethan watched, transfixed. He didn't move, didn't say a word, as the group of men mumbled something under their breath and slinked away, their egos bruised but not broken. Emily didn't turn back to look at Ethan. Instead, she knelt down next to Liam, her eyes softening as she addressed him directly. "Hey there," she said gently, her voice like a soothing balm. "Are you okay?" Liam's face was flushed, his eyes still downcast, but something in her voice made him hesitate before answering. It wasn't pity that she offered, but understanding. She didn't need to fix him. She just needed to be there. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Liam looked up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet connection that for the first time made Liam feel seen. Ethan's throat tightened as he watched this exchange. He wasn't sure why he felt a sudden sense of guilt, watching this young woman be the one to speak up for his son when he hadn't been able to. His fingers twitched with the urge to say something, to apologize, but no words came. Instead, he just watched, helpless and motionless. Emily turned to walk away, but before she did, she gave Liam a reassuring smile. "You're not alone." As she moved off, Ethan's heart raced, and he found himself struggling to understand the emotions swirling within him. A deep sense of gratitude mixed with an uncomfortable recognition that he hadn't been there for his son in the way he should have been. And somehow this waitress, this stranger, had done more in that single moment than he ever had. Liam's eyes were still following Emily as she returned to the service station. The boy didn't speak, but Ethan could see the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips, something Ethan hadn't seen in far too long. The moment hung in the air, and for the first time, Ethan felt the cold, hard shell of his world crack just a little. Have you ever had a moment when someone showed unexpected kindness that changed everything for you? What was it like? Let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed an act of kindness that made you rethink what truly matters. Ethan sat in the now quiet restaurant, his mind a swirl of confusion. The scene with Emily replayed in his head like a loop, her voice cutting through the noise of his thoughts. She'd done something he hadn't been able to. She'd stood up for Liam, for a child she didn't know, with a fierceness that made Ethan feel small, inadequate. Liam was still staring at the spot where Emily had disappeared. His fingers traced the rim of his glass absent-mindedly, as if lost in the silence. Ethan had always assumed that money could solve everything for Liam. The best doctors, the finest schools, tutors to teach him things beyond his years. But it hadn't worked. His son still felt alone. Why hadn't he seen it? The way Liam's eyes flinched at the slightest sharp sound, how he avoided looking people in the eye, how he shrunk away from the world around him as if it were a constant threat. Ethan hadn't paid attention because he didn't know how. He was too busy building an empire, too focused on wealth to understand the things that truly mattered. And now a woman, someone who had no reason to care, had stepped in when Ethan should have. She'd protected Liam without question, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A part of Ethan wanted to thank her, to tell her that she'd done something he could never have. But a much larger part of him recoiled. Why did he need her help? Shouldn't he be the one looking out for his son? His hand clenched the edge of the table, the expensive tablecloth crinkling beneath his fingers. Liam looked up at him, his expression uncertain. "Dad, can we go?" Liam's voice was soft, a whisper as fragile as the air between them. Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had no idea what to say to his son anymore. Words seemed meaningless in the face of all the things he had failed to do. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, his son's simple request struck him deeply. Liam wasn't asking for more luxury or distractions. He was asking for something he couldn't even articulate, something far more fundamental. "I think we should go home," Ethan said, his voice gruff, but something in the words felt different. For the first time, it was as if he wasn't just going through the motions. Maybe he didn't have all the answers, but he could at least try. Liam nodded, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but filled with the weight of things left unsaid. Ethan pushed his chair back, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and stood up. As they made their way toward the exit, Ethan's gaze flickered over to where Emily had been, but she was gone. For the first time, he felt the absence of her presence like an open wound. The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Emily's face. Her gentle, unflinching determination to stand up for his son, to shield Liam from the cruel world, seemed to haunt him. The image of her calm but firm stance in front of the bullies, her unwavering eyes locking with theirs, stayed with him long after he'd left the restaurant. Ethan had always prided himself on his ability to control everything around him, but in that moment, he'd felt powerless. Helpless. He couldn't even protect his own son. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conference calls and meetings, but no matter how hard he tried to focus on work, Emily's face kept appearing in his mind. There was something about her presence that lingered, something deeper than just the way she stood up for Liam. It was the way she looked at him, at both of them, without judgment. She had seen through the walls Ethan had spent years building around himself. By mid-afternoon, he found himself standing in front of the restaurant, staring at its polished glass windows. His gut twisted as he fought the urge to go inside. He didn't even know why he was here. To thank her? To apologize for being the kind of father who didn't see his son's pain? The thought of confronting the woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life made him uneasy. But the truth was, he couldn't get her out of his head. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The restaurant was nearly empty, only a few diners scattered at tables, and the clinking of glasses barely filled the air. It was a different atmosphere now, quieter, as if the building itself was holding its breath. And then he saw her. Emily was standing near the counter, her back to him, adjusting the apron around her waist as she prepared to go on another round. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she seemed focused on the task at hand, not noticing the man standing in the doorway. Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to say. Should he apologize for being a distant, neglectful father? Should he thank her for stepping in when he hadn't been able to? Should he tell her how much it meant, even though he wasn't sure how to express it? Before he could make up his mind, Emily turned around. Her eyes met his, and for a split second, she looked surprised. Then, that familiar warmth softened her expression. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice polite but guarded, as though she didn't quite recognize him yet. Ethan took a step forward, suddenly feeling out of place. I wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday with Liam." Emily nodded slowly, a small understanding smile tugging at her lips. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly. "Everyone deserves respect, especially kids." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. The simplicity of her words cut through him more than anything he could have expected. He had everything: money, power, success. But Emily, someone who had nothing in comparison, had the one thing he had lost along the way: compassion. Can I get you a coffee? Or something?" Ethan asked before he could stop himself, the words slipping out more awkwardly than he intended. Emily raised an eyebrow, as though surprised by the offer. She looked him over, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "Sure," she said finally. "But just for a moment. I've got a shift to finish." Ethan smiled, relieved, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. He didn't know why he felt so nervous, but he pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't just about thanking her. This was about something more. Something he wasn't yet ready to understand. As they sat down at a small corner table, the tension between them wasn't uncomfortable. There was an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition that neither of them had the answers, but they were both looking for something. The silence stretched on for a while before Emily broke it with a soft chuckle. "Is it weird for you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "You know, meeting someone who's not impressed by your money?" Ethan laughed, the sound surprising even himself. It was light, free, and for a moment, he felt like he could be himself, someone who didn't have to measure every word, every action. "I suppose it is," he said, "but it's refreshing." Emily's smile softened, and for the first time, Ethan felt like he was on the verge of something real, something that wasn't about success or failure, but about connection. Reflection question: have you ever met someone who didn't judge you based on what you had, but rather who you were? What impact did that have on you? The coffee arrived, and the moment of awkwardness seemed to dissipate. Emily took a sip, her eyes never leaving Ethan's face, as if she were silently weighing him, as if the weight of her gaze could strip him down to his core. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the familiar unease of being scrutinized building up again. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in years, but for some reason, it wasn't unpleasant. "So, what's your story?" Emily asked after a few moments of silence, her tone casual but curious. She leaned back slightly in her chair, one leg crossed over the other, and her posture suggested she wasn't in a rush. There was no judgment in her question, just an open, welcoming inquiry. Ethan stared at her, unsure how to answer. His life had always been neatly compartmentalized. His career, his wealth, his family, all separate entities that never truly intersected. To this woman, his wealth meant nothing, which was part of what made her so different from the world he usually navigated. She wasn't impressed by the designer suits, the expensive watch, or the lavish car he drove. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. "I guess. I'm just a businessman. Nothing too exciting." He let out a short, humorless laugh, as if he were trying to make light of something he had spent his life obsessing over. Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying the simplicity of his words. "Just a businessman? You're not even going to tell me what you actually do?" she asked, her voice playful but with an underlying challenge. Ethan shifted in his chair, suddenly feeling the walls he had built around himself begin to crack. "I own a few companies," he muttered. "Mostly tech stuff. You wouldn't be interested." She tilted her head, considering him for a moment, and then shrugged. "I don't know. Tech stuff sounds fascinating. But I guess it's easy to get wrapped up in things like that, isn't it?" Her eyes softened as she spoke, and for a second, there was a quiet understanding between them. "Yeah, it is." Ethan paused, the weight of her words landing harder than he expected. He thought about his own life, the hours he spent in boardrooms, the endless negotiations, the cold, sterile offices where everything was measured in numbers and outcomes. He had never considered what that focus had cost him emotionally. Liam's face flashed in his mind, and his heart sank. "I'm not a good father," he confessed before he could stop himself. His voice came out raw, laced with regret. "I've spent so much time building my businesses that I never really saw my son. Not like I should have." Emily's expression shifted, no longer playful but understanding. Her gaze softened, and she didn't look away as she let his words settle in the space between them. "I'm sure it's not that simple," she said gently, leaning forward slightly. "You're here now, right? You're doing something about it. That's more than most people would." Ethan let out a deep sigh. "But that's just it. I'm not sure I know how to do anything about it. Liam, he's different. I've never known how to be the father he needs." Emily studied him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "No one's perfect, Ethan. Especially when it comes to parenting. But trying, that's the first step, and that's what matters." Her words were simple but powerful. They weren't filled with pity or judgment. There was no easy solution, no quick fix. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like someone truly understood the weight of what he had been carrying. He had spent so many years living in his own isolated world, but sitting across from Emily, someone who was so different from him, yet who seemed to grasp the very essence of what he was feeling, made him feel seen in a way that felt strangely intimate. "Thanks," he said quietly, the words feeling heavier than he intended. "I didn't expect this conversation to be so real." Emily smiled softly, a genuine warmth radiating from her. Sometimes, the most unexpected conversations are the ones that change things. Ethan wanted to argue that nothing could change the state of his life, that the damage was too deep to fix. But he didn't. He couldn't. Something in her voice, in her steady presence, told him there was a possibility he hadn't considered before. Maybe he could start over. Maybe he could learn how to be the father Liam needed. Maybe he wasn't as lost as he had thought. There was a brief silence as both of them processed the weight of the moment. Ethan looked out the window, at the busy street filled with people who seemed to be going about their lives with ease. How many of them had their own struggles, their own pains? How many of them felt just as lost as he did? Before he could get lost in his thoughts, Emily broke the silence again. "Do you want to see him? Liam, I mean. I don't know what he's up to, but maybe he'd like a change of scenery. A little distraction." The offer surprised him, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. Why would she want to spend more time with Liam after what had already happened? But there was something in the way Emily had looked at Liam, something in the way she cared for him without expectation, that made him think she genuinely wanted to help. "Yeah," Ethan said after a moment, nodding slowly. "I think he'd like that. He could probably use someone who doesn't treat him like a burden." Emily smiled, and Ethan felt something stir in him, a flicker of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Have you ever had someone offer to help when you felt like you didn't deserve it? How did that make you feel? Comment below and share a moment when someone reached out to you when you least expected it. Ethan sat at the kitchen table in his penthouse apartment, his coffee cold in front of him. It had been 3 days since the conversation with Emily in the restaurant, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him was shifting. Her words about being a father, about trying, had lodged themselves into his mind, repeating like an old song. But even more than that, it was the way she had looked at him, with understanding and warmth, that had made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. He hadn't seen Liam much over the past few days. The boy spent most of his time in his room, lost in his books or drawing, as if he too were trying to avoid the tension between them. Ethan had tried to reach out a few times, but Liam had withdrawn further, his usual attempts at communication growing more distant. Ethan had always believed that providing for his son was enough. He'd hired the best tutors, the best caregivers, and ensured that Liam had the finest things money could buy. But now, as he sat in the silence of his apartment, he began to question whether any of it mattered. Had he been so consumed with his work that he had missed what really mattered? Had he neglected Liam's emotional needs, as well as his own? The door to Liam's room opened, and Ethan looked up. His son stood in the doorway, his gaze tentative as he shifted from one foot to the other. Ethan felt a twinge of guilt at the sight of him. How had they become so estranged? "Hey, buddy," Ethan said, trying to sound casual, but feeling the weight of his own uncertainty. "How's your day going?" Liam shrugged, a small gesture that spoke volumes. He didn't meet his father's eyes, instead focusing on the floor as if afraid to make any connection. "I don't know," Liam murmured. "I was reading. I guess it's okay." Ethan stood up, his heart aching. This was the moment he had dreaded, yet knew was inevitable. He had to fix this. But how? How did you fix years of neglect with a few words, a couple of gestures? There was no manual, no roadmap to guide him. He was fumbling through the dark. Liam's gaze flicked up, but it was only for a second before he quickly looked away again. Ethan could see the wariness in his son's eyes, the fear of being disappointed again. "You know," Ethan began, his voice soft but firm, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About us. I know I've been distracted, and I want to change that." Liam didn't say anything. Instead, he crossed his arms tightly over his chest, a gesture that spoke more clearly than words ever could. He didn't believe his father. And honestly, Ethan couldn't blame him. The silence between them stretched on, uncomfortable, almost suffocating. Ethan could feel the weight of his own failure settling on him like a heavy cloak. He had been so focused on building his empire, on succeeding in the world outside their home, that he had missed the one thing that truly mattered, the relationship with his son. He couldn't change the past, but could he make it right now? Was it even possible to rebuild something that had been broken for so long? "I'm sorry, Liam," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "I haven't been the father you deserve. I haven't been there for you, and I know that. I want to fix that. But I need your help, okay? I need you to give me a chance to try." Liam's expression was unreadable. He didn't respond, but his gaze softened ever so slightly. The smallest crack in the wall he had built around himself. "I know it's going to take time," Ethan added, stepping closer to his son. "But I want to be here for you, Liam. Really. I want to learn how to be the kind of father you need me to be." Liam looked up then, meeting his father's eyes for the first time. There was something vulnerable in his gaze, a hint of uncertainty, but also something else, maybe hope. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flicker of something more, a desire for connection, before Liam quickly looked away again. "Maybe," Liam said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "But it's not just about saying stuff, Dad. It's about showing it." Ethan swallowed hard. His son was right. He couldn't just apologize and expect everything to be fine. He couldn't expect Liam to instantly forgive him for the years of neglect. This was going to take time, effort, something Ethan wasn't sure he was ready for. But in that moment, something in him shifted. For the first time in years, Ethan realized that he didn't just want to fix his relationship with Liam out of guilt. He wanted to do it because it was the right thing. Because his son deserved more than a father who buried himself in work. And then, unexpectedly, Ethan's phone rang. It was the kind of call he always dreaded, the kind that signaled more work, more obligations. He stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. But in the end, he knew what his priority had to be. He turned the phone off without answering, slipping it back into his pocket. "Dad." Liam's voice broke through the silence, his expression a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "I'm here," Ethan said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I'm not going anywhere." The next few days were harder than Ethan had expected. Despite his best intentions, the distance between him and Liam seemed to stretch even further. Liam's withdrawal wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. It was as if the boy had retreated into himself, pulling away from everything and everyone in a desperate attempt to protect himself from more disappointment. Ethan had tried everything, taking Liam to the park, sitting with him in the library, even suggesting they watch a movie together. But each time, Liam's responses were muted, his enthusiasm non-existent. It felt like every attempt to bridge the gap between them was met with silence, a wall that Ethan couldn't break down. Meanwhile, his thoughts kept returning to Emily. Despite the brief conversation they'd shared, something in her words had unsettled him. She was right, of course. She had been right about everything. And yet, it stung to hear it from someone who wasn't even part of his world. Someone who had no idea what it was like to carry the burden of wealth and success. She had seen through him in a way that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. Ethan couldn't deny that there was something about Emily that drew him in. It wasn't just the kindness she had shown to Liam. It was the way she saw people for who they truly were, not for what they could offer. There was a simplicity in her that made everything in Ethan's life seem so complicated, so full of empty promises. But he resisted the pull. He told himself it was foolish to get involved with someone like Emily. She was a waitress, after all, someone whose life was so different from his own that it was impossible for them to have anything meaningful. He didn't need that complication. He didn't need someone like her reminding him of how lost he had become. But the more he tried to push her out of his mind, the more her image lingered there. She had become a symbol of everything he was trying to reclaim: honesty, connection, simplicity. And it terrified him. One evening, after another attempt at reaching out to Liam had failed, Ethan found himself standing at the same restaurant where everything had changed. He hadn't meant to come here, but somehow, his feet had led him inside. As he stepped through the door, he found himself scanning the room for Emily. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was waiting for him. Have you ever resisted a connection with someone because it felt too complicated or risky? What held you back? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been afraid to let someone in, even when you knew it might be the right thing to do? Ethan hadn't planned to return to the restaurant. The decision had come on impulse, driven by something deeper than logic. He had spent the past few days trying to focus on his work, on repairing his strained relationship with Liam, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the memory of Emily. The way she had stood up for his son, the quiet strength she had exuded, it kept haunting him. The truth was, he didn't want to admit it, but he found himself wanting to see her again. So here he was, walking through the restaurant's door as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The soft hum of the ambient music, the clink of glassware, and the smell of gourmet dishes wafting through the air didn't seem to register. His thoughts were focused on her, the only thing that seemed to matter in that moment. As he stepped inside, he saw her right away. She was behind the bar, a tray of drinks in her hand, and she seemed completely at ease in her environment. But when her eyes met his, there was a flicker of surprise. Emily didn't give him the same warm greeting she had before. Her face softened, but her posture became more guarded. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but distant. "What are you doing here?" He was taken aback by her coolness, not expecting her to be so detached. The warmth from their previous encounter was gone, replaced by something more neutral. I wanted to talk," Ethan said, his voice unsure, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone in his pocket. It was a nervous habit, one he hadn't even realized he had. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and Emily held up her hand, cutting him off. "I don't know what you're expecting, Ethan," she said, her tone soft but firm. "This is a place of work for me. I'm not here to help you sort out your life, or your issues with your son." Ethan's heart sank. It wasn't as though he expected her to solve his problems, but he hadn't anticipated this kind of cold reception. She wasn't angry, but there was a definite wall between them now. One that hadn't been there before. "I didn't mean it like that," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "It's just, I don't know who else to talk to about this. I'm trying to fix things with Liam. Trying to be a better father. But it's hard. I don't know what I'm doing." Emily's gaze softened ever so slightly, but she didn't lower her guard. She set the tray of drinks down on the counter, her movements deliberate. "I'm not the person you should be talking to about this, Ethan. You need to talk to Liam. You're the only one who can make that right." Ethan's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this kind of advice, certainly not from Emily, of all people. She wasn't a therapist or a counselor. She was just someone who had shown an ounce of kindness when it mattered most. But somehow, that small act of kindness had turned into something more, something that had begun to unravel the carefully constructed walls around his heart. "I've tried," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But he won't let me in. He doesn't trust me anymore." Emily didn't immediately respond, her gaze lingering on him as if she were weighing his words. Then she sighed and leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the counter. "You've got to give him time," she said softly. "He's not going to open up to you overnight. You've spent years being absent in his life, and now you want him to just forgive you and let you in? That's not how it works, Ethan." Her words stung, but they were the truth. Ethan had spent so long assuming that his wealth and position could buy him the love and respect he wanted, both from Liam and from others. He had forgotten that love was earned, not purchased, and that trust was a fragile thing. He had taken it for granted, and now he was paying the price. "I know," Ethan murmured, "but I'm trying. I really am. I just don't know how to fix this. I don't know where to start." Emily's expression softened, though she didn't say anything for a long moment. She seemed lost in thought, her brow furrowed as she considered his words. Then, after a pause, she finally spoke again, her voice quieter, almost vulnerable. "You've got to show up for him, Ethan," she said, her eyes meeting his with a sincerity that almost took his breath away. "Not just with grand gestures or promises, but with the small, everyday things. With your time, your patience. That's where you start." Ethan felt a pang of guilt, but also something else, hope, maybe. The idea of being there for Liam, not just as a provider but as a father, was something that terrified him. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Emily was right. This wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. It was going to take time, effort, and maybe even some humility. "I'll try," he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll do whatever it takes." Emily nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. "You should go talk to him," she said. "Liam needs to see that you mean it. That you're not just here because you're feeling guilty or trying to fix something to make yourself feel better. He needs to know you're here because you want to be." Ethan nodded slowly, his mind already racing with 1,000 thoughts. "Thank you," he said, though the words felt inadequate for the weight of what he was trying to express. Emily gave him a small, almost sad smile before she turned away, walking back toward the service area. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, staring at the place where she had been, trying to process everything she had said. But as much as he tried to convince himself that this wasn't going to change anything, a part of him knew that it already had. Emily had been right. This wasn't something that could be fixed with a single conversation or a grand gesture. It was going to take time. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan was willing to put in that time. As he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected connection was the key to healing not just his relationship with Liam, but his own heart as well. Have you ever been given advice that was difficult to hear, but ultimately changed the way you approached a situation? How did it impact you? Let us know in the comments how advice from an unexpected source changed your perspective or helped you grow. The moment Ethan stepped out of the restaurant, he felt a weight settle over him. It wasn't a physical weight, nothing as tangible as the heavy pressure of the city streets, but a shift within him. Emily's words had landed deeper than he was willing to admit. She had been blunt, but he needed that kind of honesty. The walls around his heart had been built with lies and avoidance, and now for the first time, he was forced to confront them. But as he stood in the cool night air, a sense of urgency began to stir in him. He had to go home. He had to do something. Anything. He couldn't waste another minute. It didn't take long to get back to his apartment. The city buzzed around him, but all he could focus on was the thought of Liam. He had spent years making excuses for not being there for him. Too busy with work, too tired after a long day, too preoccupied with everything except his son. Now, he realized that all those excuses had left a boy who had never truly known his father. As soon as he entered his apartment, he was greeted by silence. the kind of silence that had become an unwanted companion in their home. The place was spotless, too spotless. Ethan hadn't even noticed the absence of clutter, the toys, the books, the mess that might have once indicated a child's presence in this space. But now, the apartment felt empty in a way it hadn't before. He made his way down the hallway, toward Liam's room. He paused at the door, not knowing what he expected to find. Should he knock? Should he just enter? He had never been the type of father to sneak into his child's room. But tonight felt different. He knocked lightly, hesitantly. "Liam." Ethan called softly. There was no response, but the sound of a shifting chair told him his son was inside. He knocked again, a little more firmly this time. "Liam, can we talk?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm. A few seconds passed, then the door creaked open just enough for Liam to peek out, his small face partially hidden. There was a guardedness in his eyes, but there was something else too. The vulnerability Ethan had glimpsed before, the boy who was still willing to give his father a chance, even if just a sliver, was still there. Ethan's heart tightened at the sight. Liam didn't say anything, but Ethan could see the faintest glimmer of curiosity in his son's eyes. He knew he had to tread carefully now. He couldn't just throw himself at Liam and expect things to change instantly. "I know things have been hard between us," Ethan started, his voice soft, almost unsure. "I know I haven't been the kind of father you need. And I can't fix everything right now, but I want to try. I want to be here for you. Really, I do." Liam didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at his father, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as if holding himself together. Ethan's heart broke a little more at the sight. He had never seen his son so closed off, so distant. "I'm not asking for you to forgive me right away," Ethan continued, the words spilling out in a rush, as if his mouth couldn't keep up with his thoughts. "But I need you to know that I'm going to try. I'm going to be here for you, even if it's just small things. If you'll let me." There was a long pause. Liam's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Ethan thought he might say something. But then, Liam simply shook his head. "I don't know," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. "You're always so busy, Dad. And when you're here, you're not really here." Ethan felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Those words cut deeper than anything else. He had always assumed that as long as he was physically present, whether at the dinner table or in the same room, that was enough. But it wasn't. He had been absent, even when he was home. And now, Liam was telling him exactly what that had cost him. Ethan took a deep breath, fighting the sting of his son's words. He wanted to say something, anything, to fix it. But the truth was, there was no quick fix. The years of neglect couldn't be erased in a single conversation. All he could do was start over, one small step at a time. "I know, Liam," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. "I haven't been here in the way you needed me to be. And I can't change the past. But I'm here now. And I'm going to try. I'm going to show up for you, even when it's hard." Liam didn't look convinced, but he didn't turn away either. Ethan saw the tiniest shift in his son's expression, a hint of something that might have been hope, or maybe just curiosity. It was enough to make Ethan's heart swell with a cautious optimism. "I know it's going to take time," Ethan added quietly. "But I'm not giving up. I'm not going anywhere, Liam. For a moment, they just stood there, staring at each other. Then, without another word, Liam stepped back, closing the door softly. Ethan stood there for a long while, listening to the faint sounds of his son inside the room. His breathing, the faint shuffle of footsteps, the soft murmur of something being turned over in the quiet stillness of the night. It wasn't a breakthrough. Not yet. But it was a start. Ethan turned away from the door, his heart still heavy, but lighter than it had been when he first walked in. He knew this was just the beginning, and there was a long road ahead. But as he made his way down the hallway, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing. Slowly, maybe, but they were changing. Have you ever had a difficult conversation that, while it didn't solve everything, made you feel like a new chapter had begun? How did you move forward from there? Drop a comment and share a time when you started rebuilding a relationship that had been broken. How did you take that first step? Ethan had spent the past few days trying to wrap his head around everything that had happened. The conversation with Liam hadn't been the breakthrough he had hoped for, but it wasn't a failure either. He had managed to get through to his son, if only just a little. Liam had let him in, even if it was only for a moment. But now Ethan realized it was time to start understanding the deeper wounds, the things that had driven them apart in the first place. For years, Ethan had buried the past. He didn't dwell on it. He didn't have the luxury of dwelling on anything. He had built his life around the idea of success, business success, financial success, the kind of success that everyone around him admired. But none of it had ever fixed the damage he had done to his personal life, to his family. None of it had ever helped him understand why his relationship with Liam had crumbled so completely. It had been his own fault. He knew that now. But there was something deeper that he needed to uncover, something he hadn't confronted in years. The truth about himself, about what had driven him to neglect his son in the first place. Late one evening, after spending the afternoon with Liam, though he barely spoke to him, just sitting in the same room as his son, Ethan found himself alone in his office. The quiet was deafening. The walls of the sleek, minimalist room seemed to close in on him as he stared at the stack of papers on his desk. It was all so meaningless now. The endless meetings, the mergers, the deals, none of it mattered. Not anymore. His gaze fell on an old photo frame on the corner of his desk, a picture of his parents, his mother and father, both smiling, both young, vibrant. Ethan had been just a boy when that picture was taken, back when life seemed simpler, before the walls of the world had come crashing in. Before he had become the man he was today. He reached for the frame, his fingers brushing the glass. The smile on his mother's face was frozen in time, a memory he hadn't allowed himself to think about in years. His father, too, was in the photo, tall, imposing, always the figure of strength and authority in their family. Ethan remembered the way his father had always pushed him, always demanded more. There had never been room for mistakes, for weakness. There had only been success. Anything less than perfection was failure. That had been his upbringing. And it had shaped him into the man he had become. But it had also broken him, just as it had broken his relationship with Liam. Ethan let the frame fall back into place, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just about being a father. It was about the ghosts from his past, about how he had been raised, about how he had internalized the pressure to succeed, to be perfect. His father had always been so distant, so focused on his career, on his legacy. Ethan had been raised to believe that love and attention came in the form of success, financial stability, achievements, and accolades. It had never occurred to him that his father's love, or his approval, might come in a different form. For Ethan, it was too late for that. His father was gone now. The man who had shaped so much of Ethan's life, who had instilled in him the drive to be successful at any cost, was no longer alive. But the scars he had left behind, those were still here. They were still with Ethan, shaping the man he was, the father he had become. And now, as he sat in the quiet of his office, the weight of that realization pressed down on him. He had spent years trying to prove something to his father, trying to be the son he had never been able to be. And in doing so, he had lost himself. And he had lost Liam. Ethan stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. He needed air. He needed distance from this suffocating room. He had spent too many years trying to escape his past, and it was time to face it. He grabbed his jacket and left the apartment, walking through the streets of the city like a man possessed. The lights blurred around him as his mind raced, running through his past, his failures, his regrets. But there was something else now, too, something that hadn't been there before. A sense of determination. A desire to stop running, to stop pretending. He made his way to the one place he hadn't visited in years. A small, quiet cemetery on the outskirts of the city. His parents were buried there, side by side, in a plot that had always seemed too small for the ghosts that lingered there. The evening air was crisp, the sky a deep purple as he stood in front of their graves. He hadn't come here in years, not since his father had passed. He had always avoided it, too many memories, too much pain. But tonight, it felt necessary. Ethan stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the gravestones. His mind churned with questions, questions he would never have answers to. Why had his father been so distant? Why had he never shown affection? Was it because he had been too consumed with his own ambitions? Or was it because he simply didn't know how to love? He wasn't sure he would ever have the answers. But as he stood there, the cool wind rustling the leaves around him, he realized something. It wasn't his father's approval that he needed. It was his own. And for the first time in years, he felt like he might be able to give it to himself. Have you ever had to confront the painful truths of your past in order to move forward? What did you learn from that experience? Let us know in the comments if you've ever had a moment where you finally faced the past and how it changed your path forward. Ethan had left the cemetery with more questions than answers, but he couldn't deny the shift within him. For the first time, he felt a sense of clarity, as though something deep within him had finally cracked open. The ghosts of his past, his father's distant love, his own struggles with self-worth, had always controlled him in ways he hadn't fully understood. But standing there in the quiet of the cemetery, he'd made a promise to himself. He wasn't going to let his past define him any longer. The next day, as he stood in the kitchen of his apartment, brewing another cup of coffee, the weight of the last few days seemed to press down on him. He had made some progress with Liam, small steps, but steps nonetheless, but there was still a lot to do. Still so much ground to cover before he could truly rebuild their relationship. His phone buzzed on the counter, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at it, seeing a text from Emily. It was unexpected. She had been quiet since their last meeting, and he hadn't thought about reaching out to her. But now, her message caught him off guard. "Hey, just checking in. "How's Liam doing?" The simple question made something stir in him. It was a small thing, a simple text, but it felt significant. Emily didn't need to check in on him, didn't need to care about his son's progress, but she did. It made him realize how little he had allowed himself to open up to anyone, how isolated he had become in his own life. He hadn't let anyone in, not truly. Ethan took a deep breath before he responded. "He's better. A little. We talked. It's slow, but we're getting there." He paused for a moment, considering the next part of his message. He wasn't sure if he was ready to dive into the depths of his own emotional turmoil, but something about Emily's willingness to listen made him want to try. "I've been thinking a lot about my own past. My father, and everything that's led me here. It's a lot." The text took longer to send than he expected. He had always been careful with his words, guarded with his emotions. But something was changing, and this felt like the beginning of something more, something he wasn't sure he was ready for, but something he knew he needed. Emily's response was quick. "I know it's not easy, but you're doing the right thing. You don't have to do it alone." The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't a grand gesture, nothing like what he had imagined. It was just simple, quiet support, but it was enough. Enough to remind him that he wasn't completely alone in this. Before he could respond, the door to the kitchen opened, and Liam walked in. His eyes were still tired, his movements slow, but there was something different about him today. A slight shift in his expression, a hint of curiosity in his gaze. "Hey, Dad," Liam said, his voice quieter than usual. "I was thinking, maybe we could watch a movie tonight. You know, like we used to." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. His son hadn't initiated anything like this in a long time, not without hesitation, not without a barrier. But today, there was a small opening, a crack in the wall that had kept them apart. "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd like that. What movie do you want to watch?" Liam's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was a softness there now, an openness that hadn't been there before. "Maybe something with superheroes? Or something funny. I don't know." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling in his chest. The fact that Liam was even asking for this meant more than any grand gesture or expensive gift ever could. "We can do that," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Let's find something good." The rest of the day passed quietly, but for the first time in ages, Ethan felt like he was truly present. Not just physically, but emotionally. He sat with Liam, watched the movie, laughed at the silly jokes, and didn't try to fix anything. It was just the two of them, sharing a moment. It felt easy, almost natural. As the movie ended and the credits rolled, Liam stretched and yawned, his small body curling up on the couch beside his father. Ethan looked at him, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. He looked at his phone again, glancing over the message from Emily. He had almost forgotten about it, but as he read her words again, a thought lingered in his mind. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe he didn't have to do this alone. Later that night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The thoughts from the cemetery, the conversation with Liam, and the quiet connection with Emily all swirled in his mind, pulling him in different directions. He had so much to work through, so many emotions he had buried for years. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He was facing the truth, facing the parts of himself he had ignored for so long. And though it terrified him, it was the first step toward healing, not just for him, but for Liam too. The phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. "Just wanted to remind you, you're doing great. And I'm here if you need someone to talk to." Her words settled over him like a bomb, and Ethan realized for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, he could let someone in. The days after the movie night passed in a blur of small moments, quiet conversations, shared meals, and an unspoken understanding that things were slowly, but surely, changing between Ethan and Liam. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't fast, but every day there was a little more openness, a little more vulnerability, as if the cracks in their relationship were beginning to heal, piece by piece. Ethan had always been a man of control, of precision. His life had been mapped out in clean lines, business strategies, and profits. But now, in this strange, slow dance of rebuilding his bond with his son, he was learning how little control he actually had. All he could do was show up. All he could do was be present. One afternoon, after they'd spent hours building Lego models together, a simple activity, but one that had brought them closer than anything else in recent years, Liam looked up at his father, his face illuminated by the soft afternoon light streaming through the window. "Dad." Liam's voice was tentative, almost hesitant. Ethan looked up from his work, his hands stilling on the pieces of their project. "Yeah, buddy." Liam paused for a moment, looking uncertain, as if weighing something in his mind. His gaze flickered to the Lego castle they had been constructing, then back to Ethan. There was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, something Ethan hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, perhaps. Or trust. "You know, when you're not around, it feels like I'm just waiting for you to come home." Liam's voice was quiet, but the weight of the words hit Ethan hard. Ethan froze, the words lingering in the air between them. "What do you mean, Liam?" he asked gently, though he already had a sinking feeling in his chest. Liam fidgeted with a small piece of Lego, his fingers twisting it nervously. Like you're here, but you're not really here. "You know? I don't know what it is. But sometimes, I just wish you'd stop working so much. Like, I know you're doing things. But, you're not here when it matters." The words stung more than Ethan expected, and yet, they felt like a punch of truth. He had been physically present, yes, but emotionally? Mentally? No. He had been gone for so long in other ways that he had neglected the most important thing of all, being there for his son. Ethan's heart ached at the honesty in Liam's voice. He knew he had been trying, but this conversation brought him face to face with the reality of his past mistakes. "I'm sorry, Liam," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been selfish. I thought I could work all the time, that it would make things better. But I see now that it hasn't. I know I've missed so much." Liam's gaze softened, his expression wavering between sadness and something else, hope maybe. "I just want you to be here," Liam whispered. Ethan reached out, carefully placing a hand on Liam's shoulder, trying not to let the flood of guilt consume him. "I'm here now, Liam. I'm really here. And I'm going to keep showing up. I promise you that." Liam nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of trust, of belief, that made Ethan's heart both swell with emotion and break all over again. This wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was still uncertain, But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was moving in the right direction. As the afternoon wore on, they continued to build their Lego castle together in silence, a quiet but powerful understanding passing between them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a grand gesture. But it was enough. And maybe for now, that was all that mattered. That evening, as the sky outside the apartment darkened and the city's lights began to flicker to life, Ethan found himself thinking back on everything that had led him to this point. His father's distant love, his own failures, and now this fragile connection with Liam. The weight of it all pressed down on him, but there was a sense of hope now, too. He had a long way to go, but he was no longer lost in the fog of his own mistakes. After Liam had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone on the couch, staring at the empty space beside him. He had promised Liam he would be there, but there was more to it than that. He had to show up for himself, too. He had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone else, his businesses, his career, his father's legacy, that he had lost sight of the most important thing, being human, being present. He had built his life on achievements, but now he realized that it wasn't achievements that would heal him or bring him closer to Liam. It was the small, everyday moments. And it was then, in the quiet solitude of the evening, that his phone buzzed. He reached for it, almost automatically, his thoughts still swirling around the conversation with Liam. He glanced down and saw Emily's name on the screen. Her message was short, but it made his heart skip a beat. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. You're doing amazing. Just keep being there for him. You've got this." He smiled, the words sinking deep into him. There was something about her kindness, about the way she had become an unexpected anchor in his life, that made him feel less alone in all of this. He sat back, the weight of everything pressing on him in waves, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something different, a glimmer of hope, a sense of peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he was going to keep trying. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter for both him and Liam. The days that followed the quiet breakthrough with Liam felt different. Ethan no longer felt the constant weight of guilt bearing down on him in the same way. The moments of connection, however small, began to build up like a soft, steady stream. They weren't monumental changes. There were still awkward silences, still moments of uncertainty, but there was also progress, a fragile but growing sense of trust between father and son. One evening, after dinner, Ethan found himself sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing some paperwork. The apartment was peaceful, almost too quiet, and yet there was a calmness to it that hadn't been there before. Liam had retreated to his room, as he often did after dinner, but tonight was different. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel that unbearable distance between them. Suddenly, Liam appeared at the doorway, his hands in his pockets, a hesitant expression on his face. Ethan looked up from his papers, surprised by the visit. "Hey, you okay?" Ethan asked, setting his work aside. Liam shuffled a little before answering. Can we talk?" Ethan nodded, pushing his papers aside and gesturing for his son to come in. "Of course, buddy. What's on your mind?" Liam hesitated, glancing down at the floor before taking a deep breath. "I just wanted to say, I think I like it when you're home. Like really home, you know? Not just around. But, here." The words took Ethan by surprise, and for a moment, he was at a loss for how to respond. His heart swelled with something unspoken, a mix of relief, joy, and sadness all at once. "I'm glad, Liam," Ethan said softly. "I like being here too. I'm sorry I wasn't around before, but I promise I'm trying." Liam didn't meet his eyes at first, but then he looked up and, for the first time in a long while, a small smile tugged at his lips. "I know. I can tell. It's different. I can tell you're really trying." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was more than he had ever hoped for. "It's not always going to be easy, but we'll get through it. Together." Liam nodded slowly, his smile deepening just a little. "I think I'd like that." Ethan reached out, placing his hand on Liam's shoulder. "Me too, kiddo. Me too." As the evening went on, they spent the rest of the night just talking, about nothing in particular, but everything all the same. They didn't focus on the past or the hurt. They didn't try to fix anything in a single conversation. Instead, they just connected in a way that felt natural, like father and son, not strangers, not broken pieces of something they hadn't been able to put together. Later that night, as Ethan tucked Liam into bed, he lingered for a moment by his son's side, looking down at the small figure curled beneath the blankets. Liam's eyes were already fluttering shut, exhaustion taking over. "I'll see you tomorrow," Ethan whispered, smoothing the hair from his son's forehead. "Yeah, Dad," Liam murmured sleepily. "Good night." Ethan stood up, his heart lighter than it had been in years. It wasn't fixed, not yet. But it was something. It was progress. And for the first time, it felt like they were on the same path, walking towards something better. The next morning, Ethan's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Emily, just a simple one, but one that had become a lifeline for him. She had been the first person in so long to believe in him when he had lost all faith in himself. "Hey, I know things are busy, but don't forget to take care of yourself too, okay? You've been doing great, but you need to remember to breathe." He smiled at the message, feeling a warmth spread through him that wasn't from the words themselves, but from the quiet kindness behind them. Emily wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't demanding anything. She was simply there, offering support when he needed it most. She had become a reminder for him to pause, to be present, not just for Liam, but for himself. As he stood in the kitchen preparing coffee, Ethan thought back to the way he had felt just a few months ago, distant, lost, consumed by his own need for success. But now, as he watched the steam rise from his cup, he felt a shift. A subtle, but profound change. The pressure to be perfect, to have everything figured out, had started to fade. Instead, he was focusing on showing up, on being honest, on being there for the people he cared about. And that included himself. After he finished his coffee, Ethan sent a quick reply to Emily. "Thanks. I'm trying. I'll get there, slowly but surely." His phone buzzed again, and as he glanced at the screen, he saw Emily's response. "You don't have to do it alone. You're not alone, okay?" The words sank deep into Ethan's chest, and for a moment, he simply stared at them. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know exactly how everything was going to work out, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. He wasn't alone in his efforts to be a better father, a better man. And that realization felt like the first step in finally letting go of the weight he had been carrying for so long. The next few days were filled with small, meaningful moments between Ethan and Liam. They spent more time together, playing games, building things, and just talking. There were no grand gestures, no profound revelations. But the quiet connection they were building spoke volumes. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, after dinner, Ethan found himself looking out of the window at the city below. It was a beautiful view, distant lights twinkling, the hustle and bustle of a life that never stopped. But for the first time, he felt no desire to be a part of that. He had spent so many years chasing success, trying to prove something to the world and to himself. But now, as he watched the city below, he realized that his success didn't matter unless he had his son by his side. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't need to be. But he could be there. He could show up for Liam. And maybe that was enough. Have you ever had a moment where you realized that the small, everyday connections were more important than grand gestures or big successes? How did that change your perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments. What small moments have made a big impact on your life or relationships? Ethan's life had settled into a delicate rhythm over the past few weeks. His relationship with Liam had made significant strides, slow but steady. They'd started spending more time together, more than they ever had before. The moments of connection, the quiet conversations and shared laughter, filled the gaps that had once felt so vast and insurmountable. Ethan had even begun to believe, for the first time, that the walls between them could come down completely. And then, just as quickly as it had been built, it all seemed to come undone. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Ethan had just come back from a late meeting, the weight of the workday still heavy on his shoulders. He had made a promise to Liam earlier that day that they'd have dinner together, just the two of them. He wanted to keep his word, wanted to show his son that, no matter how busy he got, he was still there. Still showing up. But when he walked through the door, the house was eerily silent. He called out Liam's name, expecting his son to come bounding down the stairs, eager to see him. But there was nothing. The silence lingered, stretching between them like a thick fog. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It was too quiet, too still. He walked into the kitchen, his mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps Liam was just lost in a game or a book. Maybe he was still in his room. But when he opened the door to Liam's room, he was met with a sight he hadn't expected. Liam was standing by the window, his back turned, staring out into the city. He hadn't heard Ethan enter. The boy was standing so still that it made Ethan pause. For the first time in weeks, he couldn't read the look on his son's face. It wasn't anger or sadness, or even confusion. It was something worse. It was a kind of distance, a coldness that Ethan had feared would eventually return. "Liam?" Ethan asked softly, stepping into the room. Liam didn't respond at first. Ethan could see his son's reflection in the window, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of something unspoken was crushing him. Ethan's heart tightened, but he didn't know what to do. He wasn't sure what had happened or where it had gone wrong. After what felt like an eternity, Liam turned slowly, his expression hard to read. "I'm leaving," Liam said, his voice flat, emotionless. Ethan blinked, confused. "What do you mean, you're leaving?" His mind raced as he tried to make sense of his son's words. "Liam, what's going on?" Liam's eyes flickered with frustration, but it was tinged with something else, something deep, something Ethan wasn't prepared to face. "You're not really here, Dad. You just show up sometimes. But you're not really here. I don't even know who you are anymore." The words hit Ethan like a slap. He froze, unsure how to respond. He wanted to deny it, to defend himself, but Liam's face, his words, left him speechless. "I've been here, Liam," Ethan said quietly, stepping forward. "I've been trying, you know that." "No, you haven't," Liam shot back, his voice trembling now. "You think being home is enough. But you're still not present. You think because we sit and watch movies together that everything is fine, but it's not. I don't feel like I matter to you." The air in the room seemed to grow thick. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, his chest tightening painfully. He wanted to say something, anything, to fix this, to tell Liam that he was wrong, that he was there, that he cared more than anything. But the words caught in his throat. Liam's expression was filled with hurt and anger now. "You can't just decide to be a dad when it's convenient for you. I'm not some project you can fix because you feel guilty. I want you to be here. Not some version of you who shows up when he remembers." Ethan swallowed hard, feeling as though the floor beneath him was crumbling. He had worked so hard to be there, to rebuild his relationship with Liam, and yet here he was, faced with the stark reality that it still wasn't enough. He wasn't enough. "I'm sorry, Liam," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I've been trying, but I've made so many mistakes. I know I can't change everything overnight, but I'm here. I am. I just need you to trust me." Liam shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "You want me to trust you? Trust that you're going to be here when I need you? How do I do that when you've never really been here before?" The words stung harder than anything Ethan had heard before. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the truth behind it. He had been absent, emotionally distant, for so long that even his son couldn't believe in him anymore. Ethan stood there, speechless, feeling like a failure. The walls he had fought so hard to bring down were rising again, stronger than ever. The distance between him and Liam, the emotional chasm that had once seemed so insurmountable, felt wider than ever. "I'm sorry," Ethan repeated, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." But Liam didn't look at him anymore. He turned away, walking toward his bed, the finality in his movements cutting through Ethan like a knife. "I can't do this right now," Liam muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I just need space." Ethan stood frozen, the words sinking into him like lead. He wanted to reach out, to make things right, but he didn't know how. His son had retreated into himself again, and this time, Ethan didn't know if he could bring him back. The door to Liam's room clicked shut behind him, and Ethan stood there in the silence, the weight of his son's words ringing in his ears. The reality of what he had just heard felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder that no matter how much effort he put in, no matter how many promises he made, it might never be enough. He sank down onto the couch, his mind racing, but his body felt numb. He had spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to be the father Liam needed him to be, but it seemed like it wasn't enough. He wasn't enough. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt the crushing weight of failure all over again. Ethan couldn't remember how long he sat there on the couch. Minutes? Hours? The silence in the apartment was deafening, pressing in on him like a heavy weight. He had tried so hard to be the father Liam needed, to make up for the years he had lost. But no matter how hard he tried, it felt like every step forward was met with 2 steps back. He kept replaying the words Liam had said to him, the hurt and anger in his son's voice. "You're not really here. You think being home is enough. But you're still not present." The words felt like an accusation, one that Ethan couldn't escape, no matter how hard he tried. His mind flashed back to his own childhood, how distant his father had been, how every action was measured by success, by achievement. Love had always felt like something that had to be earned, not given freely. And somewhere along the way, Ethan had internalized that lesson, thinking that as long as he provided for Liam, as long as he was successful, everything would fall into place. But it hadn't. And now, Liam's face, his frustration, his anger, were seared into his mind. He had failed him. Ethan stood up, pacing the room, his hands running through his hair in frustration. What had he missed? What had he done wrong? He had spent so long focused on business, on building his empire, thinking that success would be the answer. But now, with the weight of Liam's words pressing down on him, Ethan realized that none of it mattered if he couldn't be the father his son needed. And Liam didn't just need his presence. He needed his emotional availability, his trust. And that was something Ethan had never given him. Not in the way that mattered. The front door opened, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew it was Emily before she even stepped inside. He didn't know why, but he needed to talk to her. He needed someone who would listen, someone who understood, even if just a little. "Ethan." Emily called softly as she stepped into the living room, her voice hesitant. Ethan turned, his face etched with exhaustion, his eyes dark with emotion. "Emily." "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice thick with the weight of his frustration and self-doubt. "I've been trying, but everything I do just isn't enough. He's so angry at me. And I don't know how to fix it. I've messed up too much." Emily closed the door behind her, her expression softening at the sight of him. Without hesitation, she crossed the room and sat beside him on the couch. "You're doing your best, Ethan," she said gently. "It's never going to be perfect. Relationships aren't built overnight." Ethan shook his head, his hands trembling as he ran them over his face. "I know, but this isn't just about trying. It's about something deeper. I can't reach him. I can't fix the damage I've done." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "You can't fix it all at once. But that doesn't mean it's too late. You've started making changes. You've shown him that you care. And he knows that. Maybe it's not enough right now, but you can't give up." "I don't know if I can keep going like this," Ethan whispered. "I feel like I've failed him, like I'm never going to be the dad he needs me to be." Emily's gaze softened, and she placed a hand gently on his arm. "Ethan, you're not perfect. No one is. But you're trying. That counts for something. And Liam knows it. He's angry because he's been hurt, and you're going to have to give him time. But you've come this far. You can't give up now." The words felt like a lifeline, but they also made him realize just how deep the rift between him and Liam really was. There was still so much work to do, so much healing left. But maybe Emily was right. Maybe he had to let go of the idea of fixing everything in one swoop and start with small, consistent efforts. Maybe the only way to truly reach Liam was by showing up every day, no matter how difficult it became. Ethan looked at Emily, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiled softly, her eyes warm but filled with something deeper. "You don't have to do this alone, Ethan. You've got me. And you've got Liam. You just have to keep showing up. That's all." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy but also filled with a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose. He didn't know how long it would take to heal his relationship with Liam. He didn't know how long it would take to truly become the father his son needed. But he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, as Ethan got ready for the day, he couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. Liam had been distant, but the anger in his voice hadn't been the real issue. The real issue was the hurt behind it. And Ethan realized that in order to reach his son, he needed to be patient. He needed to give Liam the time he needed to heal, just as he needed to heal from his own mistakes. As he made his way to the door, Ethan took a deep breath. It was time to face Liam again. Time to show him that he was committed. Time to show him that he wasn't going to give up this time. He stepped into the living room and found Liam sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. The boy looked up as he entered, his expression guarded but not as cold as before. Ethan stood there for a moment, unsure of how to begin. "I know I messed up, Liam," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I know I haven't been the father you need. But I'm trying. I'm really trying. And I'm not going to give up. I want to be here for you. I want to be a better dad." Liam didn't respond at first, his gaze flickering to the side. Ethan stood there, waiting, not pushing. The silence stretched, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just there. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice soft. "I know you're trying, Dad. I need time." "I can give you time, Liam," Ethan said quietly, his heart aching with the weight of his son's words. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. And I'll keep showing up. For you." Liam looked up, his eyes meeting Ethan's. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan saw something in his son's eyes, a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "I'll try too," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. And with that, Ethan felt a small but significant shift between them. It wasn't the end of their struggles. It wasn't the instant reconciliation he had hoped for. But it was a start. A real start. They were both broken in their own ways. But together, maybe, just maybe, they could begin to heal. Have you ever faced a breaking point in a relationship where everything seemed lost? What helped you begin to rebuild? Let us know in the comments. How did you find hope in a moment of crisis? And what steps did you take to heal a broken connection? The following days felt like an emotional roller coaster for Ethan. After that difficult confrontation with Liam, he couldn't shake the memory of his son's words, "I just need time." He knew Liam wasn't ready to fully trust him again, and that reality was a hard pill to swallow. But as much as it stung, Ethan also understood. His son had every right to be angry, to be hurt. And he had every right to need space. Ethan spent his days in quiet contemplation, trying to find the balance between being present for Liam and giving him the space he needed to process the years of emotional neglect. It was a delicate balance, one that he was still trying to figure out. But every day he made an effort, whether it was small gestures like cooking Liam's favorite meals, or simply sitting with him in silence, showing up without words, without expectations. But despite his efforts, the distance between them still felt vast. The walls Liam had built up were high, and Ethan didn't know how to bring them down. He had been so focused on fixing everything that he had overlooked the truth. Healing took time. Real healing. And that was something Ethan couldn't control. One evening, as the sky outside the apartment darkened and the city lights flickered to life, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, scribbling through some paperwork, trying to distract himself from the knot in his chest. He had avoided calling Emily for days, unsure of what to say, unsure of how much he could reveal without sounding like he was falling apart. But tonight, he couldn't keep his thoughts to himself anymore. He reached for his phone and hesitated for a moment before typing out a quick message. "I'm struggling. Things with Liam aren't improving as fast as I hoped. I feel like I'm failing him, even though I'm trying." He stared at the message for a long moment, wondering if he should just delete it, unsure if he wanted to burden Emily with his problems. But before he could make a decision, the phone buzzed with her reply. "You're not failing, Ethan. You're trying. And that's what matters. But I know it's hard. Sometimes the hardest part is just showing up every day, even when you feel like you're not making progress." The words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to believe them, to take comfort in the fact that Emily believed in him, that she saw his efforts. But still, the doubt lingered. The guilt. He had promised Liam he'd do better, but what if it wasn't enough? "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I don't know if I'm strong enough." He hit send and sat back in the chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. For a long time, there was no reply. Ethan's heart pounded as the seconds ticked by. What was he expecting? A miracle? A quick fix? He knew it didn't work that way, but the weight of his own inadequacies felt suffocating. Then, her message arrived. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Ethan. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to not know what to do next. Just keep showing up. Keep being there for Liam. It's the only thing you can do, and it's the only thing he needs right now." Ethan stared at the message for a long time, his emotions swirling within him. Emily's words weren't a magical fix, but they were a reminder. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be there. But as much as her words reassured him, the fear that had been gnawing at him for weeks hadn't gone away. What if it wasn't enough? What if Liam's anger, his hurt, was something Ethan couldn't fix? He put his phone down and stood up, pacing around the room. He needed to do something. He couldn't keep living in this state of uncertainty. The pressure of needing to fix everything was crushing him, and yet, no matter what he did, it felt like nothing was changing. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and he froze for a moment. He wasn't expecting anyone. But before he could answer, the door opened slightly, and Liam's face appeared in the doorway. Ethan's heart skipped. He had barely seen his son in the past few days, mostly brief exchanges, a quiet meal together, or moments where Liam would retreat to his room. But now, Liam was standing there, his expression hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should enter. Dad. Liam's voice broke through the silence, sounding uncertain. Can I talk to you? Ethan nodded immediately, his heart racing. Of course, buddy. Come in. Liam stepped into the room and stood a few feet away from Ethan, his hands shoved into his pockets. Ethan could see the unease in his son's posture. It wasn't the same defiance he'd seen in the past. This was different. This was uncertainty. I've been thinking, Liam began, his voice quiet. I know you're trying. I can see it. And I just wanted to say, I don't want to be angry at you anymore. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. For so long, Liam had been distant, had refused to open up. But now, here he was, willing to talk. Willing to share something. You don't have to forgive me right away, Liam, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. I know I've made so many mistakes. But I'm here now. I'm here, and I'll keep showing up. You don't have to do this alone. Liam looked up at his father, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know if I can trust you again, Dad. But I want to try. I need you to be here. Really here. Not just in the same room, but with me. Emotionally. I need to know that you're there, not just physically. Ethan's heart ached at his son's words. He had promised to be there, but the real test was whether he could show up in the way that Liam needed, emotionally, mentally, without the distractions, without the excuses. I can do that, Liam, Ethan said, his voice steady. I can be here. I'll be here every day for you. No more distractions. Just me and you, okay? Liam hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. I think I can try too. There was a long pause, and in that silence, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, there was a glimmer of hope, of possibility. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. And it was enough to keep going. The following days after that conversation felt like they were walking on fragile ground. The trust, though beginning to form again between Ethan and Liam, was still delicate, like a thread being gently woven between them, each moment where they connected, a stitch that slowly strengthened the bond. But it wasn't perfect, and Ethan knew it wouldn't be. Liam was still distant at times, retreating to his room more than usual, trying to work through his feelings in his own way. Ethan didn't push him. He simply kept showing up, whether it was by sitting in silence with him, helping him with his homework, or simply being present. It was the small, consistent actions that mattered now. No grand gestures. No promises that could be broken. Just the quiet, steady presence of a father trying to make up for the years he had missed. One afternoon, as Ethan was working from home, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. I was thinking of you today. How's everything with Liam? Ethan looked at the message for a moment, his chest tightening. It had been a while since he'd talked to her about how things were going with his son. He had kept his conversations with Emily mostly about himself, about his struggles, but he realized now that she had become an anchor for him during this difficult journey. He could trust her, lean on her, even if just for a moment of clarity. He quickly typed back. It's been better. He's opening up a little. I'm trying to be here for him, but it's still tough. The message felt vulnerable, and for a moment, Ethan debated whether he should have been more positive, more upbeat. But this wasn't about appearances. It was about honesty. A few seconds later, Emily's reply came through. "You're doing everything right. Sometimes the hardest part is just being present. And you're doing that. He knows you're trying." Ethan smiled slightly, her words offering him a quiet comfort. But even as he read her message, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. He wasn't sure if trying was enough. Liam had opened up a little, yes, but the anger was still there, buried deep beneath the surface. Ethan knew that, and it terrified him. What if, after all his efforts, Liam couldn't forgive him? What if the damage was too deep? Another buzz from his phone interrupted his thoughts. "You're not alone in this, Ethan. Keep trusting yourself and trusting him." He stared at the message, letting it sink in. Emily's words were simple, but they cut straight to the heart of the issue. He had been so afraid of messing things up that he had doubted his ability to do anything right. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe it wasn't about doing everything perfectly. It was about showing up, being real, and letting things unfold as they would. He put his phone down and stood up, walking over to the window. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the city. In that quiet moment, Ethan realized something that had eluded him for so long. He had spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to be perfect, that he had forgotten how to be vulnerable. And vulnerability, real vulnerability, was the key to healing. To truly showing up for Liam, he had to let go of his fear of failure. He had to allow himself to be imperfect, to be human. With a sigh, he walked back to the table, his mind finally feeling a little clearer. He glanced at the clock. It was almost dinner time. He decided then and there that tonight he was going to do something different. It was time to have a real conversation with Liam. No more tiptoeing around, no more pretending everything was okay. He needed to talk to his son, really talk. Not about fixing things, not about promises, but about how they were both feeling. He wasn't going to force his son to forgive him, but he was going to be open. He was going to give Liam the space to say whatever he needed to say. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table, the air felt different. The tension that had been lingering between them for weeks, maybe even months, seemed to hang in the space between them. But Ethan wasn't going to shy away from it anymore. "Liam," Ethan said, his voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About how I've been showing up for you. And I know that sometimes it hasn't been enough. I know I've made mistakes. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm really trying." Liam didn't look up from his plate, but Ethan could see the small shift in his son's body. The walls that had been so high were beginning to show signs of cracking. It was slow, but it was progress. "I know, Dad," Liam said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I know you're trying." Ethan exhaled, feeling a knot in his stomach loosen slightly. "I'm sorry, Liam. I really am. I wish I had been there for you more. I've always thought that if I just kept working, if I kept providing, that things would be okay. But I know now that it's not about that. It's about being here for you. And I'm learning, Liam. I'm learning that being here means showing up every day, not just physically, but emotionally too." Liam was quiet for a long moment. Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for a response, unsure of what to expect. And then finally, Liam looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Liam said softly, his voice raw, as if saying the words hurt him. "But I'm willing to try. I think I can give you another chance." Ethan's chest tightened at the words, the raw honesty of them. His son wasn't ready to forgive him completely, not yet. But this was a step toward healing, a step toward rebuilding what had been broken. "That's all I'm asking for, Liam," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking for everything right now. I'm just asking for a chance. And I'll keep showing up. I'll keep trying every day." Liam nodded slowly, his eyes still uncertain, but there was something in them, something that told Ethan that they weren't completely lost. I think that's all I need too," Liam whispered. Ethan felt his heart swell, and he reached across the table, placing a hand gently on Liam's. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real. They were both in this together, and as long as they kept showing up for each other, there was hope. In the days that followed, the shift between Ethan and Liam was palpable, though still fragile. They were no longer walking on eggshells around one another, but there was an unspoken understanding that healing was still a work in progress. Liam had agreed to try, to give Ethan another chance, but Ethan knew that wasn't a simple task. Trust couldn't be built in a single conversation, and forgiveness wasn't a light switch that could be flipped on and off. It would take time, and there were still moments when Liam retreated into his own world, pulling away when things got too difficult. But the difference now was that Ethan wasn't running away too. He was staying. Ethan had spent so many years avoiding the hard parts of being a father. He had allowed his ambition and desire to provide for Liam to blind him to the things that mattered most: presence, emotional support, connection. And now, as he tried to rebuild his relationship with his son, he realized just how much he had missed. It wasn't just about offering things or fixing problems. It was about being there, in the moments when it was difficult, in the moments when there were no easy solutions. It was about vulnerability. And in those moments, when Liam opened up, even just a little, Ethan felt like he was finally starting to understand what it meant to be a father. One afternoon, a week after their conversation at the dinner table, Liam came downstairs, his school bag slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. Ethan was sitting on the couch, flipping through some paperwork, when he noticed Liam standing in the doorway, hesitating. "Hey," Liam said, his voice quiet but not distant. I thought I could show you something." Ethan raised an eyebrow, setting his papers aside. "Sure, what is it?" Liam stepped into the room and pulled out a notebook from his bag, opening it to reveal a series of drawings. Ethan's heart skipped when he saw what they were: detailed sketches of a cityscape, full of intricate details. Liam had always been quiet about his interests, but Ethan recognized the passion in the lines. It wasn't just about drawing, it was about creating. It was about expression. "This is really good, Liam," Ethan said softly, glancing up at his son. Liam shrugged, looking a little embarrassed. "It's nothing. Just something I've been working on in my free time." "No, it's not nothing," Ethan said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I can see you've put a lot of work into this. You've got talent, buddy." Liam's cheeks flushed a little, but he didn't pull away. "Thanks," he mumbled. Ethan leaned forward, his voice sincere. "You've always had this in you, Liam. You just need to believe in it. Believe in yourself. And you don't have to do it alone." Liam nodded, but it was clear he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. "I don't know if I'm good enough," he said quietly, staring down at his sketches. Ethan paused for a moment, his heart aching for his son. "You're more than good enough. And you don't have to be perfect. All that matters is that you're doing it because you love it. I'm proud of you no matter what." Liam didn't respond immediately, but Ethan could see a flicker of something in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Ethan to know that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path. That evening, Ethan found himself reflecting on the last few weeks. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments of doubt. But there had also been moments of real connection, moments where he had seen a crack in the armor that Liam had built around himself. He thought about the conversation they had had that night at the dinner table, when Liam had said he was willing to try again. And Ethan realized that those small moments, those brief glimpses of trust, were more valuable than anything he could buy for his son. The real work was in showing up, in being there, even when it was difficult. As the days passed, the gap between them seemed to close just a little more. It wasn't perfect. There were still difficult conversations, still times when Liam retreated into himself, but Ethan could see the cracks starting to heal. He was still learning, still trying to be the father Liam needed, but now for the first time, he felt like they were in this together. Ethan didn't expect an instant fix, but he did expect that, if he kept showing up, if he kept trying, the walls would come down, slowly but surely. He knew that Liam's forgiveness wasn't something he could demand or rush. It had to be earned, and it would take time. But for the first time, Ethan believed that he could be the father his son needed. And that was the most important thing of all. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. Ethan glanced at it, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past few weeks. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. You've come a long way. You've made a real difference in Liam's life. You're exactly the kind of dad he needs. Just keep being there." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And that was enough. He put the phone down, standing up and walking over to the window, looking out at the city below. The world seemed a little less overwhelming now. He had come a long way, but the journey was far from over. The road to rebuilding his relationship with Liam was long, and there would be bumps along the way. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt like they were heading in the right direction. And that was all he could ask for. The weeks continued to pass, and with each one, Ethan felt the slow but steady transformation in his relationship with Liam. Their bond, once fractured by years of emotional distance and unspoken words, was beginning to heal. It was a slow process, but the small moments of connection, of laughter, shared glances, and silent understandings, made all the difference. Ethan found himself looking forward to those simple moments with his son, something he hadn't done in years. He no longer measured his worth as a father by his ability to fix things or provide answers. Instead, he found that the real measure of success was in being there, consistently, even when things were difficult. He had learned that love wasn't something that could be bought or earned through achievements. It was something that had to be given, nurtured, and accepted in its most vulnerable form. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Ethan was surprised by a shift in the atmosphere. The air was lighter than usual, and there was an ease between them that hadn't been there before. As they ate, Liam casually mentioned something that made Ethan's heart swell with pride. "You know," Liam began, looking up from his plate, I've been thinking. I want to show my drawings to my class next week. I'm not sure they'll like them, but I want to give it a try." Ethan's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. He had never expected Liam to open up about something so personal, something so vulnerable. But here it was, his son, taking a chance, trusting that his work had value. It was a step forward in more ways than one. "That's amazing, Liam," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you. You should definitely show them. You've got real talent, and it's important to share what you love." Liam's face lit up slightly, his eyes meeting Ethan's for a brief moment. "You think so?" "I know so," Ethan said, his heart full. "And no matter what happens, I'm proud of you for taking that step. I'll be here for you, every step of the way." Liam didn't say anything more, but the quiet smile on his face spoke volumes. It wasn't just about the drawings, it was about the trust they were building, the bond that was beginning to form between them. Later that evening, as Liam went to his room to work on his drawings, Ethan sat in the living room, reflecting on the past few months. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but it had been worth every step. He had learned what it truly meant to be a father, to show up, to listen, and to be vulnerable. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And the results, those quiet, fleeting moments of connection, were proof that he was on the right path. As the days passed, the distance between them seemed to shrink even more. Liam's hesitations, though still present, began to fade with every shared moment, every word of encouragement from Ethan. The healing process was not linear, it had its ups and downs, but it was real. One Saturday afternoon, after a long week of work, Ethan found himself sitting with Liam in the park, watching him run around with other kids. It was a moment of normalcy, a moment where he didn't have to try so hard to fix anything. He simply existed in the space beside Liam, offering his presence, offering his support. When Liam came over to sit beside him, tired from playing, he smiled up at Ethan. "Dad, I think I'm ready. I'm going to show my drawings to the class on Monday." Ethan smiled back, his heart swelling. "I'm proud of you, Liam. No matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Liam nodded, the weight of his own uncertainty still there, but lighter. "Thanks, Dad. I think I'm ready for it." Ethan didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held, and he didn't know what their relationship would look like in the coming years. But in this moment, with Liam beside him, he realized that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that they had made it this far, that they were building something real, something that could withstand the challenges ahead. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Ethan wasn't afraid of the road ahead. He had learned to trust the process, to trust that each step, no matter how small, was part of something greater. As they walked back home, Liam talking animatedly about what he hoped his classmates would think of his drawings, Ethan couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in this journey. He had his son, and his son had him. And that was enough. That evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Ethan sat on the couch, his phone beside him. He had been meaning to reach out to Emily, to thank her for her support, her encouragement. She had been there when he needed her most, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this. He picked up his phone and typed out a quick message. "I just wanted to thank you for everything. I'm still learning, but I can see the difference I'm making with Liam. I'm not sure I could have done this without your support." He hit send and set the phone down, a smile tugging at his lips. He didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, he felt hopeful. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't have all the answers. But he was trying. And that, he realized, was enough. How have the people who supported you shaped the way you approach your own relationships? Have their words or actions helped you heal or grow?
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. And also, do not forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new story dropping on this channel.